Megan, it's strange, isn't it? Everyone kept saying how perfect our life is, yet here I am, questioning everything about it, I said, staring blankly at the dinner table, absent-mindedly fidgeting with my wedding ring. David looked up from his phone, a hint of irritation in his eyes. Megan, not tonight. I'm exhausted. Can we just have one peaceful dinner? I nodded, biting my tongue. Another evening, another conversation cut short. This had become our routine, silences filled with unspoken emotions. As I cleared the table, my phone buzzed. Mrs. Carter, there's been an accident. Your husband and his passenger are in critical condition, the voice on the other end informed. The plate slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. What? Where? How bad is it? My voice was frantic. Calm down. They're being taken to Mercy General. Come quickly, the caller said before hanging up abruptly. I grabbed my coat and rushed out, my mind racing. In the emergency room, I was met by a police officer. Mrs. Carter? He asked, his face somber. Your husband and his passenger were involved in a car accident. They're both in surgery. His passenger? I whispered, trying to process. Who was with him? The officer hesitated. I believe her name is Samantha Foster. My heart sank. Samantha, my sister? What were they doing together? I spotted my mom, June, entering the waiting room. Megan, what's happening? I heard about the accident. Samantha, where is she? Mom, I don't know. They told me she's in surgery with David, I said, barely holding back my tears. 2 hours later, a doctor approached us. Mrs. Carter, Mrs. Foster, your husband and daughter made it through surgery. They'll live, but their conditions are serious. It'll be a long road to recovery. Relief mixed with confusion filled me. Why was Samantha in David's car? I looked at my mom, searching for answers, but she looked as puzzled as I felt. Days turned into a blur. Between hospital visits and sleepless nights, questions gnawed at me, but I pushed them aside, focusing on David's and Samantha's recovery. Though frail, David managed to speak. Megan, it wasn't my fault. You have to believe me. I nodded, but the doubt lingered. Why were they together that day? One evening, as I sat beside David's bed, Samantha's voice whispered from her room. I'm sorry, Megan. I never meant for this to happen. Sorry for what? What were you doing with David? I asked, my patience wearing thin. Samantha averted her eyes. Helping with the apartment. You had to work, remember? That doesn't explain everything, Samantha, I said, feeling my frustration bubble over. Before she could answer, the officer from earlier approached. Mrs. Carter, we need to talk. It seems there's more to the accident. We've found evidence suggesting tampering with your car's brakes. How is tampering? My knees felt weak. Who would do such a thing? We're investigating, but it might be someone close to you, he said, looking directly at me. My mind raced. Who could it be? How could this happen to us? In that moment, I realized the illusion of our perfect life had shattered, just like the plate that fell from my hand that night. The days ahead would test me in ways I never imagined. The day of our planned shopping trip with Samantha dawned earlier than expected. I was getting ready when my boss called. Megan, I need you to come into the office. It's urgent, he said, his voice strained. I glanced at my watch. But today is... I know, Megan. But it can't wait, he interrupted, sounding desperate. I sighed, feeling the pressure mount. I had promised Samantha this day. Running my fingers through my hair, I went to find David. David, I'm so sorry, but I have to go into work. Can you help Samantha with the furniture shopping today? I asked, feeling guilty. David's face softened despite the usual strain between us. Sure, Megan, I can do that. Are you okay? Yeah, just stressed. Thanks, David. I'll be back as soon as I can. I hurried out, catching the first bus to the office. The day was a blur of meetings and emergencies, all while my mind kept drifting to Samantha and David. Late in the afternoon, my phone rang. An unknown number flashed on the screen. I answered, my heart sinking immediately. Mrs. Carter, I regret to inform you, I heard nothing else. My entire world flipped upside down. As the unknown caller continued speaking, I held on to the edge of my desk, feeling the room spin. I rushed out of the office and sped to the hospital, my thoughts racing almost as fast. The echoes of the previous night's revelations kept haunting me. In the waiting room, I saw the same police officer who had become a grim fixture in our lives. His presence hinted at how dire the situation was. Officer, what's happening? Is it my husband and sister again? I asked, breathless. Yes, Mrs. Carter. Their conditions are still critical, but we have some suspicions regarding this incident too, his tone grave. What do you mean? My voice shook. We think someone tampered with their car, he said, studying my reaction. This couldn't be happening. Sabotage again? I glanced to see my mom, June, rushing in. Megan, what's going on? Samantha and David. Mom, it's bad. The police think someone tampered with their car, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother gasped, clutching my arm. Who would do such a thing? That's what we need to find out, the officer said. We need to investigate, but it's looking like someone close to you is involved. As we waited, my emotions whirled. David was supposed to help Samantha, but now they both lay fighting for their lives. In the sterile halls of the hospital, the doctor emerged again. Mrs. Carter, Mrs. Foster, they'll make it through surgery, but their conditions remain serious. It'll be a hard recovery. Everything felt like a nightmare come to life. As I struggled to process this, a chilling thought crossed my mind. Who would do this, and why target David and Samantha? David was conscious again later, still weak but coherent. Megan, he croaked, reaching out for my hand. It wasn't my fault. I sat by his bed, trying to piece everything together. The same questions replayed. Why were they in the car together? Why did this keep happening? Then, like a shadow cutting through the dim light, another question loomed. Was someone deliberately trying to tear us apart? The pieces didn't fit, and the answers kept slipping through my fingers. The days ahead would reveal more than just the extent of their injuries. They would expose the darkest corners of our lives, corners I wasn't ready to face. I gripped the steering wheel, driving to the hospital with a white-knuckled intensity. The news of the accident played on repeat in my mind. David and Samantha. Why did this keep happening? The hospital loomed large as I pulled into the parking lot. I stumbled through the entrance, my breaths coming in shallow gasps. The familiar sterile smell hit me like a wave. I rushed to the receptionist. David Carter and Samantha Foster, please. Where are they? They're on the 3rd floor. ICU, she responded, eyes filled with empathy. Racing to the elevator, I barely noticed the others around me. Every second felt like an eternity. As the doors opened on the 3rd floor, I spotted the police officer from earlier, waiting with a grim expression. Mrs. Carter, let's talk, he said, leading me to a small, quiet room. What happened? I demanded, my voice cracking. Preliminary evidence suggests someone tampered with the brakes on your car, he began. We're investigating, but we need to address some initial suspicions. I looked at him in disbelief. Who could have done this? We don't know yet, but it might be someone very close to you, he said, holding my gaze. The room spun as I tried to comprehend his words. Someone close to me? Who would do such a thing? Just then the doctor entered. Mrs. Carter, you and your mother can see them now, but they're still very weak. Please, just a few minutes. We followed him silently to the ICU. I walked in, feeling like a ghost. David lay motionless, tubes and machines everywhere. His eyes fluttered open as I approached. Megan, he whispered, his voice strained. I'm sorry. David, don't try to talk, I said, a lump in my throat. We'll figure this out. I moved to Samantha's side, her face pale and battered. She slowly opened her eyes, looking at me with a flicker of guilt. I'm so sorry, Megan. I never wanted this, she mumbled, tears welling up. Why, Sam? Why were you with David? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Before she could reply, the officer stepped in. Mrs. Carter, we have more questions for you. We suspect there might be something deeper going on. He led me out of the room as my mind raced with a flurry of questions. What do you mean by something deeper? I asked, trying to keep up. We're looking at this from all angles. Right now, our focus is on who had access to your car and why they'd target both David and Samantha, he explained, his tone serious. I nodded, absorbing the weight of his words. Someone had it out for my family, and as the picture started to come into focus, I realized I needed to be strong to face whatever truths came our way. Back in the waiting area, June wrapped her arms around me. Megan, we'll get through this. We have to. Her words offered a small glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. As I sat there, I knew the days ahead would be filled with difficult revelations and harder choices, but one thing was clear. I wouldn't stop until I uncovered the truth. And whoever was behind this, they'd pay for every bit of pain they caused. The hospital became my second home in the weeks that followed. David and Samantha were awake but far from okay. Their recoveries were slow, and with each day, our family splintered further. David's frustration grew, seeping into every interaction. One evening, as I entered his room, I found him seething. "Megan, this is unbearable," he snapped. "Why can't you do anything right? Get the nurses, now." I flinched at his harsh tone, but nodded and stepped out. While I sought the nurses, a knot tightened in my stomach. Returning with a nurse, David glared at me. "It took you long enough," he muttered. Embarrassed and hurt, I took a step back, letting the nurse do her job. Walking out, I heard Samantha calling for me. I headed into her room, already bracing for the stress. "Megan, can you help me with this bed adjustment? Why is everything so hard to reach?" she complained, sounding almost whiny. I adjusted the bed, trying to keep a steady hand. "There you go, better?" "Yeah, thanks. Just, don't you get tired of this?" she asked, her voice softer, almost reflective. I sighed, wiping a hand across my forehead. "It's exhausting, Sam, but it's what we have to do." She looked away, silent, and for a moment I thought through the shadows of her guilt. But I couldn't afford to delve into their thoughts. Actions mattered now. Moments later, June joined me in the hallway. She looked worn out, dark circles under her eyes. "Megan, dear, this is too much. You need rest." "I can't, Mom. They need me," I argued, though my body ached with fatigue. As I turned to leave, I caught a snippet of conversation that chilled me. "Damn it, Samantha, how could you trust anyone else to handle this mess?" David's voice accused from his room. "I thought we'd be smart enough to avoid this," Samantha retorted, her voice dripping with exasperation. Their words hung in the air as I stepped back, unnoticed. Everywhere I turned, betrayal seemed to lurk. Later that evening, the officer returned with an update. "Mrs. Carter, we confirmed that your car's brakes were tampered with. It appears meticulous." A lump formed in my throat. "Do you have any leads?" "We're following up on some information, but nothing concrete yet. It seems very personal," he added. I nodded, feeling the weight of new suspicion. Each discovery pushed me closer to an edge I couldn't ignore. Back in Samantha's room, I watched as she rested fitfully. Her condition was serious, and her needs were endless. But as I cared for her, the tension between us lingered just below the surface. David, on the other hand, became increasingly venomous. "Megan, this is your fault, isn't it?" he'd accuse, his bitterness slicing through the thin air of the hospital room. "You always wanted something more. Well, look where that got us." I clenched my jaw, swallowing down my retorts. Silence became my shield. As days dragged on, June was caught between us, her own exhaustion growing. The strain in David and Samantha's behavior took a toll on her, and it showed. In the quiet moments, when the hospital felt heavy with unspoken words, I knew I had to stay resilient. This darkness, whatever it held, would not swallow me whole. The truth, however twisted, was my next goal. And in that journey, my quiet determination was my solitary companion. June sat next to me in the waiting room, her face pale from the persistent strain. "Mom, you should go home. Rest," I said, squeezing her hand. She shook her head. "No, Megan, I need to be here for both of you." A police officer approached, his expression serious. "Mrs. Carter, can we speak privately?" I nodded and followed him to a small room. The door closed behind us, magnifying the silence. "We've found more evidence," he began, eyes locking onto mine. "The brake tampering points to someone close to you. Further investigation led us to Maxine Lewis. Do you know her?" My heart skipped a beat. "Maxine? No, I don't think so." "She has a strong vendetta against David," he explained. "It seems they have a history." I had never heard of her before, but my gut twisted. What kind of history? "We're still piecing it together, but she's someone you should be aware of," he said, his tone firm. "We'll keep you updated." Back in David's room, I tried to mask my turmoil. He lay there, eyes closed, looking fragile. When his eyes opened, the familiar coldness was there. "David, do you know a Maxine Lewis?" I asked, my voice steady. He blinked, showing confusion for the first time. "Maxine? Why are you asking about her?" "She's connected to the brake tampering," I said, watching his reaction closely. David's face darkened. "Don't believe everything they say. Megan, she's just a liar trying to ruin me." A chilling realization set in. His words sounded defensive rather than innocent. I took a step back, needing to breathe. Later, as I moved through the hospital, I saw Samantha's demands growing. "Mom, I need this. I need that," she whined, pushing June to exhaustion. With June physically drained and emotionally wrecked, the hospital turned into a battleground. I saw the toll it took on her, breaking my heart. One evening, as I huddled in the courtyard for a moment of solitude, I heard hushed voices. Peeking through the window, I saw David on the phone. "You need to fix this, Samantha. We can't let Megan find out." David's voice was stern. Samantha replied, her voice shaky, "I thought we covered all our tracks. How did they find Maxine?" David glanced around, then hissed, "She's relentless. We need to deal with her before she exposes everything." Their words sent a shiver down my spine. My suspicions solidified into a horrifying reality. They were in on something deep, something dark. Determined to get the truth, I confronted Samantha the next morning. "Sam, what's going on between you and David?" I demanded. Her eyes widened, fear and guilt mingling. "Megan, you don't understand. Help me understand then," I said, my voice cracking but forceful. Before she could respond, the same officer reappeared. "Mrs. Carter, we've confirmed some findings. Maxine Lewis has a significant grievance with your husband related to financial deceit and personal betrayal." I stood there, my world crumbling as the pieces came together. David and Samantha had lies stretching far and wide, and now Maxine's quest for revenge had entwined us all. Leaving the hospital that night, my resolve hardened. The darkness needed to come to light. But first, I'd have to face both David and Samantha, expose their deceit, and deliver justice for everyone hurt along the way. The truth was no longer hiding, it was marching right towards us. With every step, I knew I was getting closer to unraveling the entire conspiracy, and I swore to myself nobody would walk away unscathed once the truth surfaced. The days passed in a blur, each one blending into the next. My focus sharpened. I had to confront David and Samantha. The lies needed to end. One morning, I stood outside David's hospital room, summoning the courage to go in. When I finally walked in, his eyes flicked up from his phone. "Megan, what now?" he asked, annoyance clear in his voice. "I know about Maxine. I know about the tampered brakes. You need to tell me everything," I demanded, crossing my arms. David's expression shifted, a sneer curling his lips. "You think you know everything, huh? You know nothing, Megan." "No more lies, David. Why was Samantha with you?" I pressed, feeling my anger surge. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Samantha and I are closer than you think. We've been together behind your back for months." No, I felt the ground give way beneath me. "What?" I whispered, barely able to breathe. David's eyes gleamed with malice. "Yeah, Megan. While you were busy playing the doting wife, Samantha and I were planning a future. One that didn't involve you." My heart pounded in my chest. "You used me?" "Of course," David said, his voice dripping with contempt. "We needed your money, your connections. It was all a game." With shaking hands, I left his room and stumbled into Samantha's. She looked up, guilt and fear etched into her face. "Megan, she started, but I cut her off. "Spare me the excuses, Sam. I know. David told me everything." She broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I shouted, rage boiling over. "You betrayed me, sabotaged my life." Samantha sobbed, unable to meet my eyes. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. We just wanted to push you out of the way, take control." I clenched my fists, shaking with anger. "You wanted to destroy me. Why? Because you were jealous? Because you and David wanted my life?" Suddenly a nurse walked in, startled by the intensity in the room. "Is everything okay here?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "No, it's not, but it will be." I left the room, resolved to take action. The first step was meeting with the officer. "Mrs. Carter, we have more to show you," he said, leading me to a small office. The screen flickered to life, showing surveillance footage from my car. There were David and Samantha, laughing, touching. The evidence was undeniable. Tears filled my eyes as I watched my trust shatter. "Megan," the officer's voice was gentle, "we can pursue charges. Their manipulation of your finances, the attempted murder, it's all documented." Stunned, I nodded. "Do what you need to do." Later, at home, I found a message from Maxine. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "David destroyed my life. I needed him to pay. I never meant for you to be hurt, Megan." Maxine's pain mirrored my own, a twisted kinship formed through betrayal. Her story, one of deceit and revenge, echoed in mine. The next day, I returned to the hospital with divorce papers. David's eyes widened when he saw them. "Megan, wait. We can work this out," he pleaded, a hint of desperation in his voice. "It's over, David," I said coldly, dropping the papers on his bed. "You took everything from me. Now you'll pay." Walking away, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. Samantha's screams echoed behind me, but I didn't turn back. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was stronger now. The truth, bitter and painful, had set me free. And with that freedom came the resolve to rebuild, to rise from the ashes of betrayal. David tried to stop me as I walked out of his hospital room, but I did not turn back. His pleas faded as I moved down the corridor, my steps growing firmer with each stride. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. The next few days were a whirlwind. News of David's and Samantha's affair spread like wildfire. Friends, colleagues, and even family members reached out, shocked and judgmental. I let them talk, their words bouncing off my new armor. One afternoon, I walked into a cafe for a meeting with the police officer. The place was buzzing, but I felt a strange calm wash over me. "Mrs. Carter," the officer greeted with a nod. "We have finalized the charges against David and Samantha. They'll be facing a lengthy legal battle." "Good," I replied, my voice steady. "I want justice, not just for me, but for everyone they hurt." He slid a document across the table. "This outlines their financial manipulations and the evidence we've gathered. Their social standing is already in ruins." I scanned the paper, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. It was all there in black and white, every deceitful act laid bare. Leaving the cafe, I bumped into Maxine. Her face was a mask of regret. "Megan," she began softly, "I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted David to feel the pain he caused me." I studied her, seeing the echoes of my own pain. "Maxine, you took extreme measures, but I understand why," I said, surprising myself with the empathy in my voice. "We both suffered because of him." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I'm sorry for everything." With a heavy heart, I walked away, my mind set on the next step. My journey was far from over. The legal proceedings against David and Samantha progressed quickly. Each court appearance was another blow to their fabricated lives. Their faces, once haughty and assured, now looked haunted. One morning, I stood outside the courthouse, clutching my mother's hand. June looked weary but resolute. "Megan, I'm so proud of you. You've been so strong." I smiled faintly. I had to be, for both of us. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. When David and Samantha entered, all eyes turned to them. They looked diminished, mere shadows of their former selves. David's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty." The judge's gaze was stern. "The evidence is overwhelming. I hope you're prepared for the consequences of your actions." Samantha's lawyer followed suit, but her plea sounded even more hollow. Their downfall was inevitable and thoroughly deserved. After the hearings, I approached David. For the last time, I stared into the eyes of the man I had once loved. "This is the end, David. You've lost everything." His eyes flared with anger. "You think you've won, Megan? You're as foolish as ever." I shook my head, feeling nothing but pity. "No, David, I'm no longer your victim. Goodbye." Later, I visited Samantha in her care facility. She was a shell of her former self, her demanding nature now subdued by the cold reality of her situation. "Why, Samantha?" I asked. Tears streamed down her face. "I was jealous, insecure. David filled my head with lies. I betrayed you, and now I'm paying for it." I sighed deeply, the finality of her words sinking in. "You've caused so much pain, Sam, but I hope you find peace someday." Stepping outside, I felt a strange sense of release. The storm had passed, leaving me to pick up the pieces. I was scarred, but stronger. The world outside the courthouse was bright, filled with possibilities. As I walked away, I knew the journey ahead would be about healing and rediscovering myself, free from the shadows of betrayal. The future was mine to shape, and with each step, I embraced the promise of a new beginning. 2 years later, the hospital memories felt like a distant nightmare. Life had moved forward, carrying me with it. I stood in my office, stacks of paperwork before me, yet this time everything felt different. Lighter. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. "Hey, Megan, ready for lunch?" Henry's voice brought a smile to my face. Henry Thompson had walked into my life unexpectedly. We met at a professional event, his kind eyes and genuine smile a stark contrast to everything I had known before. "Yeah, let's go," I replied, grabbing my coat. As we walked to the cafe, Henry's hand gently brushed mine, a simple yet comforting gesture. During lunch, he looked at me with a mixture of pride and affection. "You've come so far, Megan. I'm amazed at your strength and grace." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread inside. I couldn't have done it without your support, Henry. Our relationship was built on trust and mutual respect, the very things I thought I'd never find again. It reflected my personal growth and newfound independence. Life had its challenges, but I faced them head-on, with Henry by my side. Returning to my apartment that evening, I marveled at how much had changed. The walls now displayed art that I loved, and the spaces reflected my tastes, my choices. June was there, having tea on the balcony. Her presence was a constant reminder of enduring love. "Hey, Mom," I greeted, sitting beside her. She smiled, her eyes filled with contentment. "Megan, I've watched you rebuild your life from the ground up. I couldn't be prouder." "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." My voice was soft, filled with genuine emotion. We chatted about everything and nothing, enjoying the silence that spoke volumes. The turbulence of the past had given way to stillness and healing. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, a sense of peace enveloped me. The scars from the betrayal remained, but they no longer defined me. They were a testament to my resilience, a reminder of the strength I had discovered within myself. The next morning, Henry and I attended a community event. Children laughed, vendors sold crafts, and the air was filled with joy. We wandered through the stalls, soaking in the vibrant atmosphere. "Megan!" a voice called out. I turned to see an old friend. We exchanged pleasantries, and as the conversation flowed, I realized how far I had come. The community that once knew me through my shattered marriage now saw a woman reborn, thriving amidst newfound freedom. As the sun began to set, Henry and I sat on a park bench, watching the world go by. He turned to me, his expression serious but tender. "Megan, I know we've both been through a lot, but I want to build our future together. Will you?" Before he could finish, I placed a hand on his. "Yes, Henry, I want that too." His smile was radiant, and in that moment, I saw the future, bright and filled with possibility. The journey from betrayal to healing had been long, but it shaped me into someone stronger, wiser. The shadows of the past didn't disappear, but they faded, replaced by the light of new beginnings. Embracing Henry's hand, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had offered me a second chance, and this time I wasn't looking back. The future, with all its promises, awaited, and I was ready to step into it, with hope and newfound courage leading the way.